Hi everybody, I'm Maddie, the founder of the Flexpo event series where we talk all things flexible working. I'm joined today by Hanson Lee of Daddy Life and Ian Dinwiddie of Inspiring Dads, and we'd like to have a conversation around dads in the workplace, where we currently are and where we'd like to be. So if we kick off, guys, with the this kind of giant question, with both of your individual companies, what is the overall dream? What's your ambition with dads at work? You're going to be polite. Who's going to go first?
Do you want to go first, Ian?
Yeah, I'll go first. In terms of my overall dream, I guess it's about choice and it's about creating satisfaction and striving towards better environment for families and better environment for dads within the workplace. And when I talk about sort of choices, I guess it's, we're still in a world where there are assumptions around the primary role of a dad is often likely to be the breadwinner, and the primary role of a mum is to be a carer. And for the best will in the world, those societal structures exist. And what we're doing is we're trying to push against the edges of that and open up the conversation so that people feel like they have greater choice, so that there's more choice for dads to be more active, involved fathers, in the same way there's more choice for mums to get back into the workplace if that's what they want to do. And for a lot of people, those traditional assumptions create great stability and great satisfaction within relationships and on a personal level as well. But for a lot of people, it's not enough, and I think that's what that's what we're looking to do, and certainly in terms of inspiring dads, is to help men to understand what they truly want from their lives, from their working lives and their family lives, and work towards a better outcome for themselves and for their families.
Hanson, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think that's eloquated really, really well. I totally agree with everything Ian's just said there. I think from a Daddy Life perspective, what we've really been founded on is really a sense of trying to focus in and celebrate the modern day father. And I think the modern day father is and has the opportunity to be a significant pioneer, not just for themselves and their families, but also for their families' futures. And for me, when you talk about the dream and the vision, it's always been about that singular point, which actually applies to both mums, dads, carers, guardians, about modern day thriving family. And what is modern day thriving family? Because ultimately dads are part of a larger ecosystem, and that's why I think flexibility and flexible working matters so much. And kind of distilling modern day thriving family, for me, it's just about how can we all be better in some way? How can we challenge ourselves, challenge our organizations, challenge sometimes even ourselves, and what do we want? And it's amazing the amount of dads I talk to here don't even start the conversations with themselves fundamentally. Yeah. And I think every single level, from asking ourselves, talking with our families, liaising with our employers, reaching out to experts like Ian, it's about being better in every single way. And I think particularly at the moment, there is such an importance all round of just being better.
I'm just going to point out that you're also in that expert category. I like how you just immediately deferred to Ian. Then an expert like Ian, I think of you as both.
No, Ian. I think of Ian as a real expert.
2-0 Hanson.
I'm on fire.
Can I just add something into that? Because I love everything you both just said, and I'm very aware that I look at everything normally from a mum's perspective, although I try and be all inclusive. I don't believe that any of this will shift enough until we change the law. I think until we have blind parental leave, and the onus isn't just on mums to take it, I don't think anything's going to change. I'd like to know your opinions on that.
I've got an opinion on that. I can go first this one.
Go first. Yeah, you go first this one.
I agree to a point. So for me, when I think about law and I think about countries that got more equalized forms of leave, I think about the Nordic countries, I think about some other countries that are now looking at more and more reform, particularly in Australia and New Zealand. They're looking at it through law, and I think that's important. Like, without law, there is never going to be a consistent precedence. And if I think about even statutory paternity leave, I'm always reminded was only introduced in 2003, which actually was not that long ago. No. I think about what was happening before then. So I agree with you from a law perspective around consistency. I think, however, before that consistency, where are those shoots of cultural excellence? So it's really interesting that we see, larger organisations, and to be fair, they've got the resource, the budget, the CSR and the kind of board pressure to really look at it. But when we think about the last 12 months in particular, and we look at Diageo, O2, Aviva's, so many more, Aberdeen, there have been really great examples of organisations that have kind of taken it upon themselves to offer extended parental leave and actually to start to look at more sort of blind parental leave. I don't think even some of those are quite at that nirvana, but I think certainly going back to that sense of better, they're doing better. They're doing better by their people, they're doing better by themselves. So I think we need more of that, to be honest, first and foremost. I think because without the cultural level, law is always going to be a thing that people tick a box against rather than truly believing in what they can achieve with that balance with their people. And I think it goes beyond parental leave, actually. I think this is where it gets to the crux of flexible working around, if we make it only law around parental leave, what happens when they come back and that life at work after? That's why for me, I think it's part of a bigger cultural conversation about how do we balance modern day family with modern day work? And I think there's so much to be discussed there around that and so much ahead. And that's why I think organisations like Flexible are so crucial as part of that, because flexibility as a whole is going to be such a huge enabler of our growth moving forward if we can do it right. But it's got to be a cultural thing as much as a law thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And can we talk flexible working? Because the whole premise of Flexpo is that we can right so many wrongs through flexible working. So we can close the gender pay gap, we can create far more inclusive workforces, not just through flexible working, but through being flexible as an organisation. So, the people with autism, there's only 16% of people with autism in the workplace, but actually if we had less rigid interview structures and we shared pre-interview questions and we shared what the building was going to look like, or even we did them digitally, you'd open the doors in so many ways. So, we really think that flex is the crux. How important do you think flexible working is to the dads movement?
I think it's absolutely vital. I think it goes to the heart of balancing those elements of work and family that is really important to a sort of modern day man, essentially. I mean, Daddy Life's research, the Millennial Dad last year, pointed very strongly to a generational shift in terms of expectations around both equality at home and in the workplace and what dads were doing about it. GQ magazine, when they did their 30th anniversary State of the Man survey, the number one thing that men identified as for the number one trait of modern masculinity, 66% of men said it was being a present father. So those aspects around being present and being involved are very high on the agenda for certainly younger dads, I think, or a younger generation of dads. I still feel young. I'm 43 and I still feel young. I'm not sure, I know technically I don't fit into that category. I think that cuts off a little bit earlier than I am possibly. But there's a generational shift in there. And what we're seeing at the moment with the return to the workplace and COVID is an enormous opportunity, but also pressures around childcare and childcare provision not being open, workplaces starting to open. And the medium-term key is flexible working, and to take the opportunities and the benefits that dads have seen and say, actually, I want more of this flexible working, but actually to embed it into the cultures of the business. Like Hanson said, it is all about the culture. Japan have really, really high, they're world leading for parental leave, for dad paternity leave. However, it's somewhere around 6 months. I mean, it's world leading. However, almost no men in Japan take any of that at all, because the culture, legally it's there. The culture, the Japanese work society culture does not support it. So it's a really good point. It's about the culture and it's about embedding it and to take those desires that men have and building upon this opportunity, I think.
So let's talk about this, the opportunity that COVID, so that sounds like such an awful sentence to say, but one of the things that came up in a legal webinar that we did recently was how employers are often with their female employees that have children, assuming that they will want to stay on furlough, which is actually sex discrimination. Although in a way it sounds like a nice supportive thing, but actually it's not. It should be that person's individual decision. Let's talk about that in the context of fathers, because there is an opportunity then for fathers to request, not necessarily furlough, but flexible working, to step up and take ownership. But equally, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the biggest barriers to fathers is the culture of it's expected for them to let the wife deal with that. The old boys network, the old boys club, especially when I don't think you are an older father here, Ian, just to clarify, but in that kind of age bracket or that demographic, it wasn't necessarily normal for the fathers to want to be at home with the children. It was expected of the mothers. So how do fathers manage up, if you like? How do they start cultural change in their own organisation? Because that's very, very difficult to do from middle level or bottom level up rather than top down.
No, I can definitely take that one. First of all, full disclosure, if Ian's disclosing his age, I'm 21. Just for full discllosure.
You look amazing.
Thank you very much. The years haven't necessarily been fully kind, but thank you, I'll take that. So I think it's a really good question, because I read the same studies, and it's interesting, we've just published this morning our latest survey results around dads at lockdown, which is on Daddy Life. And what we found through that is actually that 76% of the dads that we've surveyed, which are more, I would say, modern day dads of a particular kind of age demographic, have actually found themselves being more involved, but actually a lot more affected, both physically, mentally, and financially in terms of COVID. But we did ask a question, what are you thinking of actively changing post-lockdown? And almost a third, so 32% actually said improving quality time with family, which is an interesting reflection. And 25%, so a quarter, have actually called out requesting more flexible working post-lockdown. And that's, is it as high as I'd like it? Probably not, but I think it's a great start. And actually, interesting enough, 16% actually go one step further and say looking for a new job post-lockdown, which is interesting. But to come back to your question around what can we start to do at an individual level. So one thing that we've done, and in fact Ian is a massive part of it as well, is called Dad Connect, which is our dad mentoring program. And it's dad to dad, and it's external dad to internal dad, because of that exact thing you just said, which is one of the biggest barriers to this change is that you've got this, as much as we talk about the generational shift, you've also got the generational tension at work, which is you've got a generation, and Ian is absolutely in this as well, no matter what you might think, around wanting to work differently, wanting to challenge what success and balance and flexibility looks like for them and their families, but actually come against a very more traditional, almost way back when perception of just men and dads should just be at work, full stop. And unfortunately, I think there have been some consequences of COVID that, as a population overall, have almost seen us hark back to the 1950s, which is just not acceptable. And we absolutely should be doing everything we can to rally against that. But where it starts for me is firstly actually with the individual, the fact that they can actually even ask themselves the questions. And I think it's amazing the amount of dads who will be doing more. But we also say that because men's emotional language is so different at work, like men as a whole are just not very good. And I'm making a sweeping statement here, but in general, men are not the best at just being that open at work and really opening up at work. And so that's a further barrier, because if you've got a sense of tension with, senior quote unquote boardroom dad who wasn't necessarily as active and thinks, that mothers should be doing most and the majority of the work, and you've got men themselves who want change but are not necessarily voicing that change, then you've got this situation where a lot of modern day dads are just struggling in silence, to be honest. So I think the first and foremost one is to know that at an individual level, change is possible, and actually to plan something with your families around what success looks like, and to have a really clear goal, because dads should never be in isolation. That obviously that's different if they're single parents, etc. But if we're part of bigger, wider family units, it's important that actually everyone is on the same journey, or the same direction at least. And then secondly, and I always say this, I think there's a surprising amount of allies at work, but sometimes we just don't look or know where to look in the right places for them. And some of those allies sometimes are other dads, so potentially other senior dads, potentially just other dads who want change. Some of those allies are, more mum-specific networks as well, that actually are there to support and help. Sometimes those allies don't even work in the same teams, But actually starting to formulate those allies are absolutely key. And I think understanding and making the right business case for change is always crucial. So, flexible and requesting flexibility. We saw this in the survey, the amount of dads that were requesting it but just weren't getting it granted was a huge differential. But actually understanding how to make your case as well, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, I mean, even in my own, we as a household, everything is a I like to think we're a democracy. I'm not sure my husband would agree with it, but even, everything that I kind of strive for in terms of flexible working, when we had our first, so I was about 25, 26, I think. So, and I do think with maturity comes bravery. So I would now be far more forthright in saying, this is how I think I can do my role. This is how it works for the business. This is the flex that I want. But I remember my husband's in the construction industry. I remember him saying to me, we discussed as a family, we'd quite like to share the childcare between us. There's absolutely no way that I can go in and request to do a 4-day week. Even if they grant it, there will be such a glass ceiling for me. I will, they'll never take me seriously again. And he really struggled with that at the time. And it's been a kind of a real transition for him to kind of, I mean, he works for himself now, but to get to the point where he felt like he could go, no, I'm leaving, actually, I've got to get the kids, or I've got to, and it's almost also that he kind of needed to justify where I was as well, because the assumption was always, well, why can't your wife be there to do that? And there is, especially, I think the construction industry isn't great for that, but there are, I mean, we've got, so Sir Robert McAlpine, as you know, are a big sponsor of Flexpo, and they are one of the few organisations that do offer blind parental leave. So there's definitely organisations making great strides within the industry. But I do think it's tricky for an individual when you've kind of got your manager going, no, or yeah, you can have it, but don't expect to then be promoted. How would you manage that?
I think Hanson's point around allies is really, really important. It's you've got to be brave as well. You've got to be really clear about what you want in the first place before you then go and seek out allies and put that business case together. And I think those honest conversations with yourself is really important. I mean, everyone I work with, I get that the first thing I get them to do is an exercise called Be, Do, Have. And it's to go back into and tap into the things they want to be, the person they want to be, the things they want to do, and the things they want to have, and then connect those up in terms of kind of a family direction, so that we're not just doing more of the same. We're not just doing more of the same, having the same kind of conversations. We are having conversations with ourselves first, and actually going back to first principles, and then getting those allies in place. And promoting the benefits, and start talking about some of the things around men's mental health. Now, there's the one thing, I don't tend to talk about mental health sort of overtly in the work that I do, because it's an intervention later on. However, it does resonate with men more generally. And so if part of your business case is not just about productivity and outputs, but it's also around mental health, I think that's quite a powerful thing to tap into, because it does resonate with men. Men understand the struggle around mental health, and you'll almost get more. It sounds a bit cynical, but you'll almost get more traction, I think, if you talk about mental health challenges than you will if you talk about childcare challenges, if you're a man talking to other men. So I think that is an opportunity around doing it, and it's getting together as a group, and looking and seeking out people who will believe the same things, and that's something that men don't necessarily do quite so well, I think, in terms of networking internally. It does take a little bit of going outside your comfort zone.
Is that really interesting, though, that the stigma of mental health is now less so than the stigma around parents looking after their own children, fundamentally, is what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it? But I think you've got to meet. It's one of those classic things. You've got to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And if your challenge is fundamentally practical around, if you're a dad and your challenge is around childcare, but you can present it in a way that resonates with your audience, it's all about working out how best to persuade your audience as to the validity of what you're seeking, the business case. And sadly, mental health is probably the thing that might work better in some ways.
The only thing I'd add, I think there's awesome points as ever. The only thing I'd probably add on top of that as well is, so one of the most interesting things I think we found from our survey last year, with the Millennial Dad with Deloitte, was that a third of dads had actually left their jobs since becoming a father to find the optimal parental work balance, and another third were actively looking. So you've got this situation where essentially you've got 2/3 of this modern day dad audience who may be in certain positions of senior management, middle management, certain project, like whatever it is, but that's a phenomenal amount of people to potentially be in the flux in some way. And so I guess relating this to an individual level, more and more dads are taking action in some way. And sometimes that action isn't necessarily even requesting for more flexible working. So, there are some industries and some jobs where that sort of flexibility just isn't possible, right? Because of the actual fundamentals of the job. But I guess that's where the conversation about what flexibility means, as Ian was saying, really matters, because for some dads, flexibility is just about having that certain day or that certain time or going to that particular, of a school event or whatever it might be, just that understanding with your line manager sometimes that actually you can work on occasion in a slightly different way. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be a formal thing. And I think that's the thing that I would say to all dads as well, especially watching this, that there are more and more dads really taking action, and actually hopefully that sense of being isolated in an organization is going to become soon less and less, because from what I see, there are more and more dads taking action, and actually dads should feel really empowered, and that the time really is now to start to make those changes. And I think if they've ever at least half open ears at a board level, it's definitely now, or at least very, very soon.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I also think, kind of in light of what's going on in the world at the moment, and I'd be interested to know how you feel about this. I think it's really important to call it out. I think if you hear, somebody make a statement about why is your wife not doing that, or, a derogatory comment about, she's wearing the trousers because you're picking the kids up or anything like that, I think it's really important to nip that in the bud and to, even if it's something that you're not involved in, it's another department, it's another person. I think we really need to kind of ally together, join forces, and kind of go, no, that's why would you say that? Just kind of get rid of this culture of women are at home and men are at work. What are your thoughts on that, both of you?
Yeah, I think, calling it out, it definitely matters. I think there's definitely a hearts and minds exercise that needs to be done with senior male leadership. Hanson was talking about it earlier in terms of generational shift, and men of a certain generation who, with best will in the world, run the majority of the senior male or the senior leadership in the majority of businesses. They kind of need to understand that things are changing, and there's an element of fear there. We need to understand that there's the best will in the world, men who are being pulled in two different directions. If they're concerned for their job and they're concerned for their job security and their long-term prospects, that fear may override some of the other elements that are going on in their life. And that desire to be an active and involved father could get pushed to one side if they fear that they're going to lose their jobs. So it does take a certain degree of bravery. It comes back to the allies point. Feeling like it's not just you is one of the really big things. It's one of the really big things that came out of Dad Connect, was knowing that you're not the only one who feels like this. And so seeking out and creating tribes of like-minded working dads who are seeking the same sort of things is so important. Then you feel like you've got other people who've got your back, and it's not just you against the world. And then when you hear something that's negative, then when you say something, someone will back you up and say, actually, no, you're out of order there. That we can't be having these conversations. You wouldn't say that to a woman, whatever it might be. But I think feeling like you're part of a bigger thing, a bigger picture is so important, to feel like you have the confidence to push back against it.
Tell me about...
I totally agree.
Sorry, Hanson, go on.
I was just going to build two things on that. One is a sort of personal reflection. One is a sort of wider reflection. I think, firstly, the personal reflection, funnily enough, something like that did happen to me a little while ago. And I wish I'd nipped it in the bud there and then, and I didn't. And it was about actually childcare, basically, and about working late and going up to see a client. And I remember thinking at that moment, there's absolutely no way, if I was a mum, that you would tell me to do that. Because it basically meant dropping everything and going there like that night, where it was basically like only me, like mum wasn't even around. So it was literally only me. And I think the comment was, well, can't just get babysitter or whatever. there's just no way that would have been said to mum. And I wish I'd nipped it there and then in the bud, but I didn't. Well, what I did do is I reflected on it for I think like a day, and I ended up doing something really brave, and it's actually changed the working. Well, it did change at the time the whole working relationship for the positive, actually, which is I actually sent an email to the person and a number of other people, and and then I followed it up with an actual face-to-face meeting, which was basically I was just really upfront about my red lines, and I'm not sure a lot of men are upfront about their red lines.
Yeah, I love that.
And my red line was basically, if you challenge anything about like me and childcare, like you're just not going, that's a red line for me. And that is a priority in my life. And if that's messed up, like I will not be the same person at work. So, I probably language it slightly better than I'm languaging it now. But to the crux of it was, these are my red lines, and it's important that I communicate that with you. And I just think, if there's one thing that I wish I'd done, was just actually communicate those red lines far sooner. And the second thing I think as well is sort of Ian's point that the dad connecting was really important. And there is a sense of we have to be in this together and call it out. But I think as well, how we teach our children about it is going to be as important.
Yes.
Because that for me is like the bigger long-term, hopefully just a sustainable goal. And so I think as much as we're managing upwards, kind of got to manage all around, really. And that, I know that sounds quite challenging, quite a lot to do, but it comes back to that sense of what's your shared destination, what's your shared vision, how do you bring it to life? Because I think ultimately we're doing things not just for ourselves, but for our kids as well and their futures. And I think it's important to always bear that in mind too.
I completely agree. I do worry though that I've gone too far with mine, because I've got two little girls, and I was putting some washing in the washing machine the other day, and we have a very equal relationship in terms of the load. And my little girl said to my husband, "Mummy, Daddy, do you think it's fair that Mummy is doing the washing? Do you not think you should be doing the washing?" So my 5-year-old is challenging my husband. Yeah, but to be fair, he was doing something else. I wasn't not pulling his weight. I've gone so far with it now that my children are like tiny little warriors. No, thank you. I think that's a really good point. Just while I've got you both, can I just, one other kind of question really, what can it, we do with our flexible, our job seeker audience, we have a lot of HRDs in that audience as well, trying to kind of, make the world a better place. What could employers be doing if you had to give 5, doesn't have to be 5, but within 5 kind of top tips for how you can start to make real culture change to have a far more equal workforce? What would they be? Putting you on the spot with this one, guys. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, I've got 3 immediately.
Oh yeah, come on then. You can do your 3.
So when we go into workplaces, the 3 things that we look to do first and foremost, 3 things really. First of all, listen, because I think it's really easy to jump to assumption, and actually some of the solutions we're talking about even on this call won't necessarily work in all organisations. So I think listening is absolutely key, and we do that in a variety of ways. We do that in qual ways and quant ways. We've worked with various different organisations in different ways there, but I think that listening to an organisation, the dads in the organisation, the mums in the organisation, and the carers, mums, dads and carers, parents and carers as a whole make up 72% of the whole UK workforce. So there's a lot of people to listen to there. Secondly, analysing. So how do you really take the human emotion out of it and look at it both from a people perspective as well as a business perspective? So truly analysing what is going on, where change really matters, how they can enforce that, and then acting on it. And I think the acting on it bit, some of our learnings there is around sometimes the person who you think is like the most senior buy-in is actually sometimes the least important, actually. And that's been one of our more recent learnings around, and it comes back to Ian's point, we were saying before about allies, who is really the sponsor of change in your organisation. And sometimes it's not always the CEO, sometimes it's not even the HRD, but the sponsor of change is really, really important. So yeah, listen, analyse and act. And it's what we've certainly found for more successful case studies recently.
For me, Maddie, in terms of things I think businesses can do that would make a fundamental change towards flexible working, is first to look really carefully at what kind of policies they have internally in terms of how they treat dads and how they treat mums. And too often there's a very large gap between the two. And so one of the challenges around that, whether it's parental leave or whether it's flexible working, and the culture around asking for flexible working and what's expected, is that we start to see things that are related to flexible working as being a mum thing. And I think, and you were saying earlier about the challenge in terms of flexible and broadening the appeal away from flexible working, remote working, whatever it might be, being just a mum thing. So I think what businesses can do is start to look at improving their provision in terms of financial provision for solo parental leave for dads, because what it enables, and what surveys tell us, is that men who take leave, and certainly men who take leave on their own with their young children, gain enormous empathy towards bigger challenges around diversity and inclusion within the workplace, not just on a gender level, but more generally. They become much more they're gaining huge amounts of empathy to how other people's circumstances might be different to their own. And by just making changes, and not every business can afford to put in sort of 6 months of fully paid leave, which is kind of the top ends of groundbreaking work from some of the big players that we've talked about earlier. But anything you can do to change that mindset, but also to look at supporting dads when they come back from their paternity leave, whether it's a 2-week period or whether it's a 4 to 6 week period, whether it's 6 months. So a lot of businesses spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring women when they return to work, and quite rightly so, but also to treat men in the same way, and to understand that for a dad, certainly the first time you become a dad, the upheaval and the emotional trauma is absolutely enormous. Something like 25% of men globally are recognized as, or are suspected as, having postnatal depression of some form or other. It's an enormous
I didn't
change.
know that. That's really
It's a piece of Daddy Life research. Well, it's a piece quoted in Daddy Life. I think it's the American Journal of Psychology or something like that. I would have to put the link in somewhere. I have got the link somewhere. But yeah, it's a really high proportion, and supporting and saying, okay, for a working dad who's had his first child, second child, certainly the first child, coming back to work, it's such an emotional upheaval. But it's very easy for the culture of the business to say, oh, welcome back. How did you enjoy your 2 weeks off? Right, let's crack on.
Yeah.
But if we can support and give them somewhere to talk to, someone to talk to, and that's where Dad Connect and the work I do is really, really important. It's giving men an opportunity to talk to someone, to process those thoughts that they're having. That will make an enormous difference to their mental health, how they feel about the job, and also how they feel about the opportunity to work flexibly and to tap into what they really want, both individually and as for their family more generally.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And Ian, just quickly, could you, sorry, because I'm aware that I've kept you way longer than I said I would, both of you. Can you just tell us about Dad Connect?
Yeah, from my perspective, so I was a mentor for Dad Connect. Hanson was the driving force behind it, but it was essentially pairing up, or one of the driving forces behind it. Essentially, it was pairing up dads, experienced dads who had potentially a coaching or mentoring background, but not exclusively by any means, but experienced dads, and partnering them up with individuals who wanted to talk to someone, wanted to engage with other dads and to build a kind of one-to-one relationship. It wasn't about coaching. I don't think any of the relationships were about coaching, but they were about being a sounding board, being there for someone, and to share it. A lot of it was about sharing stories and to feeling like you weren't the only one. So it was connecting dad to dad. Really, really powerful. I really enjoyed it, but I really enjoyed it as a mentor as much as anything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Just to build on it. So it's something that we run with 2 other organisations, so Avenir, Nadia from Avenir and Nikki from the Parent Mentor. And the problem, we kind of just had a coffee one day, and basically the problem that we were trying to solve here is actually, funny enough, it was to answer your earlier question about, what can dads do? And Ian's really good point about allies, because sometimes those allies aren't obvious. Sometimes they're not even there, to be honest. And that's when it gets really hard. And then because of that generational tension between sort of quote unquote boardroom dad and sort of modern dad, it's really hard to think about internal mentoring sometimes when culturally that mentor might be someone who just frankly isn't just on the same wavelength as you at all. And so that's why actually partnering with external dads to actually offer a genuine safe space was our solution. And that's where, you know, partnering and getting really great, knowledgeable, experienced dads, but who can also provoke and challenge other dads in the right way. And Ian absolutely falls into this, that it isn't necessarily just a sort of basic, typical mentoring experience. It is very much around, I guess, elements of just how we can be a sounding board, how we can improve certain experiences. And it's been phenomenally successful. So, you know, we ran it with dads in Deloitte, in West, a couple in the civil service, I think, and then a few more. And I think the lowest score it got, so I think a third of all the dads, actually no, 2/3 of all the dads actually scored it a 10 out of 10 in terms of recommending it to a fellow new dad, and everyone else scored it a 9 out of 10. So It's certainly something we're looking to talk to different organisations and find the right ones where it absolutely fits. But for us, it's made a phenomenal impact already, and hopefully it continues to do so.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you both very much. That was really insightful. I feel like I understand a lot more now as well. So thank you both.